Happy Monday, St. John family. After a week off, we are back to looking at The Artist's Rule by Christine Walters Paintner and working our way through that, looking at creativity as a way of bringing ourselves closer to God. For today's devotion, I have a couple of movements in it. First, I'm just going to give an announcement to St. John people. Second, I'll explain what this following week's challenge is going to be. Third, we'll have a time of Lectio Divina, which, if you're watching this live, is going to be less useful. But if you're watching this as a recording, you'll be encouraged to pause at different points in this process. And finally, I will end with a bit of show and tell. 2 weeks ago, we had a devotion where we were supposed to create some squares, rectangles of art, and I'll show you what I did and what I learned from mine. So first of all, just a quick announcement for St. John people. Remember that this Sunday is our annual meeting. You can get on our church webpage and you can get the link to either Zoom in for video conference or call a Zoom link if you want to enter by just by telephone. If you are coming in person, we will seat as many people as we can in St. John Hall, or in the sanctuary, and then any overflow will be in New Fellowship Hall. If you'd like to reserve a space, that's certainly not a bad idea, but you don't have to. And also, the second announcement is that we have settled on an interim associate pastor. More information about that will be given at our Wednesday night service, and there's a chance to meet Dr. Bella Mae Winters. We will also have that as part of our online worship on Sunday, so you can meet her a little bit, and there'll be more ways to meet her after she begins February 1st, which is next Monday. Finally, this week's challenge. We've been playing with this idea that we have both an inner monk and an inner creative that we need to give voice to. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what Christine Walters Paintner means by this, but to me, the inner monk is someone who finds beauty and meaning and spirituality in order, in making sure that things happen in a particular way and finding a spiritual path through that. And the inner creative is almost the opposite, that there's a creativity, a spontaneity, an almost chaotic freedom to create new things, which brings one closer to God in that way. And her point, I think, is that we need to dance between both of them. We can't live entirely in an orderly way. We need to find ways to be creative, but at the same time, it's not a spiritually fulfilling life if everything is always creative and moving, that we need to bring order to our days. And how to find the balance between those two things is the question. So for today, this week's art challenge is really a inner monk art challenge, if you will. The idea is to find ways to create sacred space within your life, including a sacred space for creating art. So you'll see behind me, and if you've been following all our daily devotions, you've seen this before, is my bookshelf, and I create that as a space where I can have my morning devotions before anyone else is in the office. There's a candle up there. There's some artwork. There's some rocks that have little words written on them. And often I'll also have music. And I change that around with the seasons. Right now it's kind of blue. I feel like blue is my color in the winter months because the only color often around is the blue in the sky. So that's sort of my color that I go to right now. But it's just the idea of creating something that's special. And when I glance at it through my day, it's a way of bringing a bit of calm back to me. I also have at home an art room, and I will tell you, it does not look very, it's not very relaxing right now. There's a lot of projects going on, finished ones, unfinished ones, semi-finished ones, and it's really a bit of a mess. So my goal this week is to get that to a place of order and harmony to the extent that it ever is. Just make it a little bit more organized. So that's my challenge here. So that's the first part of the challenge is to create a organized, beautiful place that you might use to create in. And that doesn't mean buying all new supplies. Sometimes if you have too much fancy stuff, you're afraid to use it. But it means knowing where it is and having it be set aside for someplace special. The other challenge for this inner monk this week is to go about imagining all your space as sacred space and all of your activity as sacred activity. So if you are washing dishes, if you are taking out the trash, if you are sweeping up all the dog hair that's all over the house, that's one of my activities. How can you see that all as sacred activity? It takes a little bit of holy imagination. It takes a little bit of intentionality. But there really is no divide between the sacred and the secular. That's a human construct, and it's not always really even very helpful. The truth is, everything that we do is in God's created world, and so therefore everything that we do on some level is a sacred activity of how we move around in God's world. And Christine Walterner's Paintner has a really lovely, just couple paragraphs here that I want to read to you. The regular practice of art making helps us cultivate creative ways of being in the world. Ultimately, our greatest creative act is living our daily lives. Creativity is about making space. It is about listening to ourselves and to the world around us. We must see beyond the surface to the multiple dimensions of the world, opening ourselves to the newness that stirs there. We can cultivate a sense of spontaneity and playfulness while honoring our commitments lovingly and intentionally. Every aspect of our lives can be an arena for creative work. When we make space to breathe deeply in our jobs, relationships, and leisure, we open ourselves up to give voice to vision and birth to newness. Creativity is an essential and life-giving practice that requires spaciousness, attention, and intention in order to flourish. As well, it requires a degree of surrender of our control over the process. It also requires listening to the wisdom of our intuition, our bodies, and our feelings, while acknowledging that nourishing our creativity is a lifelong journey and process. We also need a community that helps us discern the creativity that is waiting to be born in our lives. So, create sacred space, but also try and create a sense that all space that you occupy is sacred. Our writing challenge for this week, our creative writing challenge, is to write for yourself a prayer of blessing that you put up in a prominent place that you can read when you begin your creative time. So she has in her book one written by Ted Zaragoza, A Blessing Before Beginning. You who created the heavens and the earth, you whose hands made tables and chairs and utensils for use around the house, you who inspire my creative energy and expression, direct my mind, my heart, and my hands to create only what speaks truth, what shares more fully understanding and strengthens acts of compassion. To you who created me, thank you very much. So that's your writing creative challenge for the week, is to use your own words to write a prayer of blessing for the beginning of creative time. For Lectio Divina today, we're going to read from my favorite place that speaks of blessing, which is Matthew chapter 5. This is the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and it is the Beatitudes. So I am going to read this through twice. At the end of that, you're encouraged to pause and just repeat over and over to yourself the word or phrase that stands out to you most. In fact, as soon as you hear that word or phrase, stop listening to me and just focus on that word. The second phase is to contemplate what that word means for you. So think about it, journal about it, toss it around in your mind, and hit pause at the appropriate place in that part of the process. And the final is to write or say a prayer, something directed to God regarding what has come out of your reflection. So let us begin our practice of Lectio Divina. I invite you to sit someplace in a position that is grounded, with your feet on the floor, with your hands in an open, upright position. Maybe close your eyes, or perhaps gaze on something that is important or meaningful to you. And hear these words read through twice, and make sure you just drop out and stop listening to me as a word or phrase comes to you. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. A second reading, more slowly. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. At this time, just take the word that came to you in that reading. Repeat it over and over in your mind without thinking about it too intently. Pause. Now I ask you to reflect on that word or phrase that you were repeating to yourself. What might it mean that that word sat with you today? What might that word be trying to teach you about what is happening in your life or where God wants you to go? Pause. Finally, use that word as a prayer. Shape a prayer to God based on all the feelings that this word brought forth, all the questions that it brings to you. Turn it into a prayer to the divine, either in a silent prayer or perhaps in writing in a journal or even creating with a piece of artwork. Pause. At the end of our Lectio Divina, I said I would do some show and tell if anybody really cares. We were supposed to create these cards, and on the back, we were supposed to write a question for our inner creative, for our inner monk, and a question for both of them together. And I'm not going to tell you all the details of what I wrote because some of that is my private spiritual journey, but I will show you my cards. This was my inner creative, and you can see that there. I found this to be the most colorful card, and I'm reflecting on the fact that mixing color is a big part of what I do, whether it's layering colors in watercolor, mixing together paints to pour. The creating of the right color is a big part of what I do. So as I think of my prayer of blessing for the starting of the creative process, I think it's going to be a prayer of blessing the making of these colors, because creating color is always the first part of my process. Then we come to my inner monk, and this was a nice card. It said, live intentionally, and the small words are there when you walk into your office. That was some words from a magazine that I'd cut out a long time ago, and they seemed to speak to this card. Remember, I didn't know what was on the back of the card when I made it. And then my beautiful Labrador Retriever, Banjo, decided to eat half of it. So this is my card that is dedicated to the orderly part of my life, and my dog ate it. What does that say about my life? What does that say about my inner monk? Because certainly that is the part of my spiritual journey that I struggle with more, is keeping everything orderly. The creative stuff comes more easily, but the orderly stuff is a struggle for me. And basically, as I tried to reflect on that, the dog ate my homework. So there you go. And then this is a one for the two of them together. Um, and the words that came from the magazine cutting are little phrases: type of success, I would give up the rest, enough of this charade, delusion, and could we make it? So I've kind of I'm kind of reflecting on that. This idea that my inner monk and my inner creative both need to be present and work together. It seems like a not terribly happy marriage in my own self. So trying to figure out how to make those two work together is what I'm going to be working on. If you didn't get a chance to do these, you can look at past devotions. You have to go back 2 weeks because we didn't do one last Monday. I wasn't in the office and so didn't put one together. But encourage you to do that. Go through this creative process. Even if you don't think of yourself as an artist per se, we're all learning to be more creative and reflective in all parts of our life, and encourage you to dive into it and give it a try. Have a blessed week. Go with God's grace and God's peace.